is it not working? I'm going to stop sharing 1 second. My apologies. For some reason, it's... There we go. Why is it, apologies for that, with the screen share and the application was having a fight. So why is it so VUCA right now? Why is it so volatile? Why is it so uncertain? And the major reasons for that, I spent a lot of time researching for my book called Transition Point and looking into the social and economic factors that are driving technological progress and why it's been so disruptive, specifically since the Industrial Revolution. This is going to drive me insane. And one of the major drivers behind this is this force is called creative destruction. And that's the fact that progress is not linear, but cyclical. It's driven by innovators and their innovations, the entrepreneur creating and experimenting with new techno-economic paradigms, new means of transportation, new means of communication, new means of power, which generate whole new industries, creating an upswing of progress that ultimately plateaus, and we get into market forces where we're dealing more with efficiencies and exploitations, debt bubbles build, it collapses, and then investment moves away from the old industries and moves into the new industries, and the cycle begins again. And each one of these cycles is about 50 years in length on average. Sorry, there is something going on with it. We've had 5 of these waves. So we've had 5 of these particular waves, and the last wave collapsed around about 2008. And you all remember the financial crash that took place at that point in time. As you can see, the length of these has been decreasing somewhat, but each one generates a whole new power source. It creates new transport mechanisms. It creates new communication mechanisms, and they all combine to create whole new industries. And what we're finding is that these are getting stronger, faster, and higher. So the waves are getting more disruptive because they're becoming more frequent, they're becoming more impactful, they're diffusing incredibly rapidly because obviously digital products move much faster than physical products, spreading across societal and national boundaries. So for example, things like the latest iPhone is appearing in South Africa or other African countries at the same time it appears in, the US, for example, or the UK. So it's diffusing incredibly rapidly, digital products, games, these sorts of things moving immediately across boundaries. And the scope has changed enormously. So there's many more countries impacted by this innovation due to globalization as well. So that rather than just the brains of one country in the first industrial revolution, which is what happened in Britain, now we've effectively got the brains of the entire world. Now, why is it so disruptive right now? Is because we're in the transition period between 2 waves, the 5th wave, the industrial wave, computer age, and the 6th wave, which is all about digital. And we're moving out, we're leaving the 5th wave behind now. So we've got a lot of power shifts and a lot of power dynamics that are taking place, but we're in the upswing period. And this period is potentially the most disruptive and the most dangerous. So we've got an exponential level of technological change taking place, but our ability as individuals or as political institutions or as corporations to handle that rate of technological change is still growing at a linear rate. So we get a gap. We get a gap between the rate of technological change and the rate at which people, politics, legislation, regulation can handle that change. And that means you basically not only disruptive, but it becomes very divisive and very dangerous. So you see 2 pictures here, one from the first industrial revolution, just at the same time, and obviously across the water and across the channel, we had the French Revolution, and we've seen the other image, which is also from the streets of Paris in this wave, where we're seeing the yellow vest protests taking place. Again, because we've got shifting power dynamics, we've got an inequality of developing between those with capital who can invest in these new technologies and those with just their labor to sell, who ultimately are being disrupted by it. For some reason, I have to touch the screen before I can move on. It means these times are a time of uncertainty and unpredictability. So what we have is a large number of black swan events, and we're all living through one of these, although you might say it should be a grey swan because we've had pandemics before. But ultimately what happens is these events lead to black swan reactions. So the event itself kicks off reactions that people don't expect, and those reactions have consequences that also don't expect it. So for example, we have a pandemic at the moment which has created a massive shortage in the short term in toilet paper, which was, it's not gastroenteritis, it doesn't require toilet paper, but people panicked and we had a shortage of toilet paper. Because we had a shortage of toilet paper, people were buying lots of wet wipes and kitchen paper, and then they were flushing these down the toilets, which caused, you know, huge blockages in sewage systems. So you wouldn't have thought this pandemic would have been responsible for this, but ultimately it has been, because we have this sort of bullwhip effect of events causing reactions and reactions creating consequences. Now, one of the things we've learned from the sixth wave is that it's actually shifted the balance of power. So one of the reactions that's happened in the sixth wave has been a power shift from the manufacturer and the broadcaster into the consumer. And the first place we saw that was media. So the media industry was the first one really that got hit by digital technology, both in terms of broadcasting, but also in terms of music with things like iTunes. And it's moved us from a world where we were told what we were going to watch and when we were going to watch it. So things like watching television was a communal activity. Everyone sat around the same screen, watched the same things at the same time, went into work the next day, talked about what they'd seen because everyone had seen the same thing, be that a soap or a film or a sporting event, into a world now where we're in the sixth wave, where effectively we live in a Netflix world, we live in a world of apps, we live in a world of digital technologies where we can decide as consumers what we watch, when we watch it, what device we watch it on. So we may still be in the same room as in the first image, but ultimately we may be consuming different media at different times on different devices. So it's created an enormous power shift. And this is driving me insane. And one of the things that it's actually done as well is it's moved us away from a world where, we were looking at all at the same screen. And I remember when I was growing up, getting a whack across the back of my head quite frequently, telling me I wasn't to sit within 2 feet of the TV screen, to an individualized world where effectively now we strap screens 2 centimeters from people's heads, and each individual is able to live in this own sort of individual bubble of news and media, even down to new virtual worlds where we can inhabit. And one of the things we've seen in this new wave is the fact that convenience has become king. So one of the first companies to actually realize that convenience was a huge benefit to most customers was Amazon, of course. But now we've got a world where goods come to us, we don't go to them, be that through food or through e-commerce deliveries. It's changed the power from a world where we're going to get stuff from a retailer or a manufacturer where they want us to somewhere where we now have to go to them. Sorry, they come to us. And what we're seeing is a major shift here. We've moved a movement away from things like long-term commitments, asset ownership, and long-term investments into a world where today's consumers, and certainly the millennial generations, are looking for convenience, instant access, and instant gratification. There's an app for that, as the saying goes. So supplying this new business model increases the complexity from a supply chain perspective exponentially. We're moving from supply push chains to customer-centric networks. Effectively, the supply chain is becoming a circle with the consumer at its heart. And we've moved away from this model where the consumer travels to the retailer to one where the retailer delivers to wherever the consumer wants, wherever that could be, their smart locker, the boot of their car, their house, or even with things like Amazon Key inside the house. What this shift has done is it's changed it so that effectively things that used to be an afterthought, such as returns, reverse logistics, has now become a critical part of the buying decision. So a lot of consumers, 2/3 of them, not only check to see whether or not you can actually sell them the goods, but actually, can I return it? And how easy is it for me to return it? And again, Amazon were very the first companies to really pick on the fact that it's not good enough to have a store where people can buy stuff. I have to make it as convenient and easy as possible for them to return it. And companies like Amazon keep ratcheting up the pressure. So last year, for example, they said to their Prime members, we're going to move from free next day deliveries to same day shipping. That immediately caused a competitive response from the competition. So Walmart said, well, we've got to match that. So now the customer expectation is not only do I want to be able to order things online, but I want you to deliver them to me the same day. And that's creating an exponential level of supply chain complexity, because not only is the time reduced, but the locations by which we have to deliver them to has gone from one major retailer or one major fulfillment center to each individual household. And the upswing, this period we're in now, is a time of really rapid exponential progress. So we're in this S-curve moment where lots of things that have been inventions and been played around behind the scenes suddenly appear and they're getting forced into the marketplace. So we're right at this apex. We're at this tipping point right now. So if you think it's been disruptive so far, I'm kind of here to tell you that we haven't seen anything yet. And to give you an example of the sort of speed of change I'm talking about, if we go back to one of the previous waves at the turn of the century, go back to the third wave, we can see here this picture of Fifth Avenue in New York. In 1908, everyone is moving around by foot or by horse-drawn carriage. We changed that picture just by 5 years, and with the exception of one chap, pretty much everyone on that picture now is in a motor vehicle. That's the pace of change in the upswing period. Now, what does that look like? What does that look like in the current wave? Well, I'm going to use a law called Morovx Paradox, which is named from someone called Hans Moravec. Hans Moravec is one of the fathers of artificial intelligence. And he said, the one thing we've learned over 35 years of progress into artificial intelligence is that hard things are easy for AI to figure out, and easy things are incredibly hard. So doing things like advanced calculus or processing huge amounts of unstructured data to find trends and patterns, that's incredibly difficult for us humans to do, but machines are able to do it quite easily. However, us humans find things like spatial awareness, walking, object identification incredibly easy. Machines, however, find that incredibly difficult. If you go back just 5 years, you will see when this is the annual competition held by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, to try and find the world's best robotic systems. And you will find that when we look at these videos of those times, they're falling over like drunks on a Friday night. They're enabled to do very basic things like walk, like open doors. So you'd look at that and go, absolutely agree with that. We are, decades away from, any sort of Terminator-style robots or any sort of intelligent machines walking around. However, just 2 years later, an Atlas, a robot by Boston Dynamics, was doing backflips off raised platforms. And 2 years after that, they were doing somersaults and backflips and parkour and working in logistics factories and opening doors and being used in a number of different ways that we thought they just quite simply won't be able to do. So that's an exponential level of development, not just in the physical hardware of these robotics, but obviously also in the cognitive capabilities of them. And this automation is converging together in order to transform the supply chain. And it's creating something that I call the creative destruction triple whammy. So whammy number one is a horizontal convergence of technologies from everything from source all the way through to sell. Every physical task, every manual activity is effectively being looked at and saying, can we automate that? Whammy number two is a vertical convergence. So this is the one that has most people spooked because it's completely new, but it's the automation of things that knowledge workers would do, the automation of knowledge-based tasks. And whammy number three is technological convergence. machine to machine. So we're talking here about machine brains effectively controlling and driving machine hands across the end-to-end supply chain, creating a fully automated supply chain. And the real kicker is that all three of these are happening at exactly the same time. So if we look at whammy number one across source, make, deliver, and sell, it looks like this. So we have a number of different technologies. In source, we have agricultural robots that are able to pick fruit off the trees and count the different number of oranges on there. We have autonomous trucks working out in Australia with fully autonomous mines. We have companies like Rolls-Royce working on autonomous ships, companies like Airbus working on autonomous planes. And we have a global rollout of fully autonomous docks, which started off in Rotterdam, but is now working its way across the world. In manufacture, we've gone from just the automotive industry using robots to now collaborative robots that can be effectively used anywhere where people are doing repetitive rules-based tasks. We've got advanced levels of 3D printing that can print things like jet engines, and we even do very large things such as houses. Deliver was an area that used to get away with automation, but ever since Amazon upended and shifted the paradigm shift, changed the paradigm shift from inventory being static and people moving to it, to inventory being mobile and moving to static humans, we've seen an increasing range of warehouse automation systems. What you're looking underneath that is Vera, that's a truck by Volvo, an autonomous truck. So we're really reaching the apex point of sort of a autonomous trucking. Drones have been talked about for a number of years as delivery mechanisms, road robots like the Starship robot you see there, and even mothership concepts where we're putting, autonomous robots in autonomous vans and using them as effectively mobile mini warehouses, traveling around route schedules and delivering goods to customers. And it's even affecting the sell area. So from everything from being able to scan items using 2D barcodes through to stores like Amazon Go, where you don't even have to go to a checkout, through to robots like Pepper, which effectively are able to contain a full breakdown of your product range, interact with customers using voice, take images of the customer, direct them to the right place, work as concierge services, and do a whole host of different things, down to the FBI listening devices like Amazon Echo that most people have in their houses, and even down to things like Amazon Dash, which is small pieces of code that sit in your printer or your water filter and effectively reorder their replacement parts when they reach low. So we have a whole host of technologies, from everything from picking things out of the ground to putting things into the hands of the consumer. So our 6 waves workforce is looking a little bit like this, and they provide huge amounts of benefits. So collaborative robots are incredibly flexible. They provide a rapid return on investment. They can work 24/7 for the cost of electricity. And they also provide greater operational and performance insights. So for example, your human worker can have nimble fingers and can pack things and put things away and pick things, but they won't count or remember how much they've done. These machines are able to, take the macro down to the micro and record every activity, part count, cycle speed, all these sorts of level of data that we've never had access to before. And companies are looking at this and going, well, actually, I think we need to we can bring back our manufacturing by having a reshoring revolution. We have robots here like this Sobot robot that can create as many t-shirts in an hour as 17 factory workers out in somewhere like Bangladesh, for example. And when you saw in 2013, when the Rana Plaza disaster, the conditions that people are working in order to produce things like $10 t-shirts, you're suddenly finding that the cost of disposable fashion is disposable lives. And most consumers don't like that. Well, these new automations are giving potentials for apparel companies to bring manufacturing back to the consumers, manufacture it using automation, not having a supply chain that has, sort of human rights issues or slavery-based working conditions in it, and be able to produce what it needs when it needs it close to the consumer. Now, of course, that has a massive effect on the countries like Bangladesh, whose entire economy is based around making apparel. We've got companies like Adidas that are moving manufacturing back to places like Germany, but using robots. At the top there, you see the clips are called carbons, clip printing, which is basically the ability to make things on demand, making solid items out of liquid. And at the bottom there, bottom right, sorry, you'll see that Amazon many years ago won a patent for on-demand clothing manufacturing warehouse back in 2012, in fact. And now if you go on Amazon, you can see it has an offering called Merc by Amazon, which is if you can design it, we'll make it, sell it, and ship it for you. So effectively manufacturing as a service. And the thing is, the danger is these machines aren't replacing jobs. And this is the difference in this wave. These machines just simply aren't job replacements in the same way old machines used to be in the fifth wave and beyond. They're actually replacing human capabilities. They can see, they can hear, they can translate, they can do a whole host of number of different things. And they can do it for an incredibly small price point. So collaborative robots like Sawyer and Baxter there are $25,000 each. Pepper, your retail assistant, for example, is just $1,600 for an initial rental and then just $200 a month. Now that's cheaper than most 17-year-old retail workers you'd ever likely to get. And they're constantly getting smarter. So there is a development of artificial intelligence sensors. We've got things like Google Translate, which can now transcribe and translate speech in 8 languages in real time. They can understand what you're saying to them, and they can even smell now. So there's new artificial levels of artificial intelligence that can pass a smell test, which is very important in some types of food manufacture, but also in terms of, looking for narcotics and those sorts of things. And the really worrying thing is, they're getting smarter all the time. So Google, for example, found out once it had taught its Translate program to understand the structure of languages, they then realized that it had taught itself to translate between languages that they hadn't programmed it to do so. So it had learned on its own how to translate between different languages once it was able to deconstruct the nature and structure of languages. Now, what this means is that retail is about to be completely transformed. And if retail is completely transformed, then logistics will be also. So Amazon, with its checkout free store, immediately they got the intelligence working. They had some issues at the start. It maxed out around 25 people in a store. But once they fixed that, they then rolled it out incredibly quickly. And they're looking for places in London, they're looking for places in Germany, and they're planning to have around about 3,000 cashierless Go stores by 2021. But they've also realized that now we have this technology, we can point to anywhere where people buy goods. We can use this technology to take away the cashiers and to allow people to buy goods, just by picking them off the shelf and walking out. So they're looking at using that technology in airports and movie theaters and drive-throughs and anywhere like that. Now, of course, the moment Amazon moves on these technologies, it creates an immediate competitive response. So other retailers are looking at this cashier tech boom. Tesco's are working on it. Sainsbury's in the UK is working on it. 7-Eleven has already debuted its cashierless store. Walmart has opened up cashierless stores and actually looking at cashierless supermarkets. And in the Netherlands and in Germany, Halbert Heijn has eliminated checkout in its new store concept. And keeping on Halbert Heijn, one of the things they've found out is that they said, this latest concept, this contactless store, not only makes shopping very easy due to its autonomous nature, but it means that we can use a plug and play effect. We can put stores wherever there is a need because we don't have to recruit, we don't have to have people in the stores. So we can have pop-up stores where potentially previously it didn't make economic sense to do so, from university campuses to residential areas, to areas where there aren't shopping facilities. The other thing they found is that they can be open 24/7 because the moment someone swipes to get into the store, the lights can come on. You basically can have the store open all the time, which means as people's lives adapt to a more 24/7 existence, effectively they have stores that can also be open 24/7. We're also fast reaching a point where automation is beginning to mirror human society. A world where machines recognize us by our physical characteristics. So Amazon is spending a lot of money working on biometric payment systems, although they might want to rethink that given the fact that since the pandemic started, we don't like touching things anymore. But they're basically using our fingerprints as a way to effectively do away with the credit card. It's a unique identifier as to who we are. Probably more likely is what China has done, which is facial payment systems. So your face effectively becomes your ID, but it also becomes the method with which you pay. So in China, for example, there's a service called Smile to Pay, which is purely facial recognition. And that's being rolled out now in places like Denmark. So it looks like facial recognition is likely to be the way we move forward. Now, obviously, that brings a number of other issues, such as privacy, that a lot of people are worried about. Voice is another area. We are moving to a position where we're engaging with technology in the same way we engage with each other, by voice. So Amazon was the first out of the block with its Alexa system, where we can basically talk to Alexa via the Echo devices. Google Home devices have now partnered up with Walmart so that you can basically just order all your shopping via that device. McDonald's is looking at artificial intelligence to run its drive-throughs. Starbucks and Alibaba have launched voice ordering and delivery. 7-Eleven's done voice ordering. So basically, we're now moving away from having to use a device which we physically touch and text, and simply now just say out loud what we want, and it will arrive. To adapt to this, logistics is having to change dramatically. So warehousing is having to adapt to support these new same-day customer expectations. So Amazon has been developing a whole host of sort of urban logistics capabilities where we're actually moving the goods closer to consumer, because if I'm going to offer a 1-hour delivery promise, those goods have to be pretty close to where the consumer is in order to do that. And companies like Fabric, which was previously called Common Sense Robotics, has identified that perhaps the best location for a lot of these urban logistics locations is underground. So we have a large number in most of our city centers of underground car parks that are increasingly becoming obsolete as we move away from inner city driving, but also as we move away from, and certainly in the next few years, from owning cars into cars becoming an asset for hire as they become more autonomous. So these car parks, underground car parks, are going to increasingly become land that isn't being utilized. And companies like Fabric has identified that, you know what, we can put a warehouse in that car park. Now, currently, to get this same-day delivery, companies like Amazon and all the other e-commerce organizations are using human labor. We're using the gig economy in order to get people to pick goods up from these warehouses, move them to the consumer, to be able to deliver them same day or same hour. But these are just temporary solutions, and they're also just temporary jobs. Because what's happening is, behind the scenes, there has been a huge amount of money invested in new technologies to automate that last mile. And these new technologies are now crossing the chasm from being niche innovations into the mainstream. One of the leaders in things like road robots, for example, was Starship Robotics. And they're now on the real apex of their S-curve. And they said it took 4 years for them to achieve 10,000 deliveries, just 8 additional months to achieve 50,000. 4 months after that, they achieved 100,000, and only 2 months after that, they're now in 150,000 deliveries. And last week, they're now delivering lunch to 180,000 workers in one town, Milton Keynes, alone. So it's an exponential level of progression. Amazon's took a look at that and said, well, we can use these technologies as well. Obviously, we've got massive logistics requirements, and they created their own version of Starship robots, which, as you can see, looks absolutely nothing like it whatsoever, because they've changed it blue. But it's using exactly the same ideas, exactly the same technology to automate that last mile. Drones are ready for liftoff. So we've talked about drones now for a number of years. Last year, we saw most of the drone companies who've been working, most companies working on drones, such as Amazon, such as Google, such as FedEx, get approval from, certainly in the United States and in the UK, for beyond the line of sight deliveries. This year, they're really starting to take off. They're being used quite considerably at the moment for medical deliveries due to the pandemic, but we're likely to see drones become, a recognized way to deliver goods over the next 12 to 24 months. Autonomous vehicles, again, something that's been worked on for a large number of years now, starting to see it happen. Vera, which I mentioned earlier by Volvo's got its first job. Lots of trucks moving up and down the West Coast autonomously. Most people aren't aware of that, but they're certainly moving sort of fulfillment center to fulfillment center. We're not yet at the point where these will be going anywhere near a city center, but they're certainly moving already up and down highways. And even that last mile, that bit where we're bringing together robots and autonomous vehicles, combining forces into this mothership concept, where you have effectively an autonomous van and these robots inside, either the road robots or Ford, as you see there, has invested heavily in agility robots, where we've got a two-legged sort of bipedal robot that delivers the goods out of the back of the van and walks it up to the doorstep. Now, no presentation in the current day is complete unless we talk about COVID-19 and the pandemic. And what we're seeing is that actually that crossing the chasm, that tipping point where goods innovations move across from the sort of trough of disillusionment into the sort of slope of enlightenment, has happened incredibly quickly due to the pandemic. And it's happening because of demand pull, not of supply push. So COVID-19 has effectively added rocket fuel to the six waves automation revolution. Because what it's done is it's made the abnormal normal and the normal abnormal. It has altered the norms of human society, the things we used to do without thinking, shaking people's hands when we met them, greeting friends with a hug, working together in packed offices, eating out in packed restaurants, paying with cash. Even something that freaked me out the other day, which is when I was walking my dogs, a friend who I knew came into the park, and its pet dog, who recognized me, ran up to me. And I realized I can't pet you because, you know, there is now a stigma attached with petting animals because you could be transferring the virus onto their fur. So even these sort of very natural human behaviors are all being completely upended by the current pandemic. And it's created an isolation economy. So the movement of normal retail, normal shopping, normal behaviors to a more isolated work from home, shop from home, consume media from home world has just been accelerated by this pandemic. And you can see here a number of different things. The UK's lockdown shopping habits, there was a 12.9 billion shift in the way we spent our money in the last month alone. That's an incredible amount of, you know, changes that's happened in an incredibly small period of time. And you can see at the bottom there, that headline, the scramble for delivery robots is on and startups can barely keep up. Now you've got this enormous demand pull from e-commerce companies, from retailers saying, we need to find a way to deliver goods to consumers without touching the product or without having a human hand over the goods. Amazon is a big winner in this because it's been gearing itself up for it. It didn't know a pandemic was going to happen, but it's become the winner as a result of it. From its e-commerce retail platform that's moved from being just another retailer to effectively in the Western world, the entire marketplace, to its Prime membership, which enables you to get same-day delivery, to its video and entertainment services, which has been entertaining people as they've been locked away to home, to Alexa, which has seen a massive uptake in sales, to its just walkout technologies that are now going to be adopted by most retailers because they're going to look at ways of being able to take the human out of the equation. And all of the data captured from all of these devices are going to be stored on, you know, cloud services such as AWS. Because this pandemic is creating behaviors and expectations that will become embedded in the DNA of human society. So we're seeing a large number of behavioral changes that have some very disruptive outcomes, but these outcomes are becoming the new normal. So we're moving from a population that are being, you know, forced to use online shopping rather than using physical shopping, and food delivery versus restaurants. Now this is creating an e-commerce boom, but it's also finishing off those large shopping malls that have been near death's door for a large period of time. And it's changing a lot of business models for food establishments, for pubs, for restaurants. They're having to figure out a way to deliver goods to customers rather than for customers to come to them. We've now avoid handling cash, which means we're going to see a dramatic uptake in cashless, contactless payment systems, be that face or be that tap. We want on-demand access to goods and services, so there's going to be a massive drive towards one-hour delivery offerings using automated urban warehouses. Delivery robots and drones are going to be preferred by the customer than human delivery services. We're going to prefer locally produced goods and services. We're not going to want stuff that's been manufactured, for example, in China and shipped halfway around the world. I'm seeing this already a lot in a lot of my conversations. People are looking for more locally sourced goods. And this gives an opportunity for local providers to specialize and to focus on, you know, the provenance of its items. So we're going to see a boom in things like vertical automating farming operations in the local shops. Working from home has become the new norm. A lot of companies are not going to go back to full-on working back in offices. They're going to be looking at their high-rate, expensive offices and say, do we need these moving forwards? So we're going to see a massive boom in telepresence and in remote working, which is going to create a huge demand for 5G. It also means we're going to see a reduction in congestion and in traffic and in car parking, which will free up things like the underground car parks that I mentioned earlier. We're going to see a move away from large gatherings. So with this whole social distancing movement, it's not going to go away anytime soon. It's going to be here for a large period of time, which means we're going to see a boom in home-based entertainment and virtual reality and gaming, and a decline in group-based activities such as cinema and theatres. And generally, we're moving to a world where we're minimizing human-to-human contact. So things like cashierless just walk out shopping will become the new normal because consumers will demand it. Once they get exposed to it, then they're going to choose it by default. Oops, sorry. And the reality of the upswing is, all of this data, all of these systems, humans are too slow. Forecasting is too inaccurate. Our planning cycles are too infrequent. Black swans becoming too common. Human behavior is too irrational, and expectations by consumers becoming too demanding. So our supply chains now need to adapt in real time, and we're not up to it. And that leads me on to whammy number 2, which is the automation of knowledge work. So what we're seeing happen here is things like machine learning that companies have been playing around with, the ability to create machines that can complete tasks without being explicitly programmed to do so, are now becoming default in most planning systems. So forget about forecasting. We're now into a world where the old adage of the forecast is always wrong, we just have to minimize how wrong it is moving to a world where we actually have to use orders and demand in order to drive our supply chain. And we've got companies like Merck that are using artificial intelligence to create a self-driving supply chain, which I'll talk about in a moment. AI is able to do things that we can't do, which is identify non-linear relationships, see trend and unstructured data. And we're seeing companies, even down to the point where organizations like Amazon are saying, you know what, using the amount of data we have, we can pretty much predict what you're going to order before you order it. So why don't you just let us send it to you? What this is doing is it's creating a self-aware, self-driving, cognitive supply chain where we're moving from being able to use data to describe what's going on, so descriptive analysis. So in this example, it's telling you that you're in a traffic jam, to a level 2 phase of cognitive capabilities where it's able to predict what's going to happen. So you might be okay right now, but I can see you've got an issue coming up. Level 3 is prescriptive. So this is kind of getting to where we really want to be, which is, don't tell me that I'm stuck in a traffic jam or about to be stuck in a traffic jam. Tell me that effectively I have options. So prescribe to me what I should do. Down to level 4, which is effectively the machine making its own decisions, taking all of this data, sensing and responding, planning on its own, and changing the supply chain and adapting the supply chain based on the signals it's receiving. So level 1 and 2 are really about humans making decisions, but using data from machines. Level 3 is about humans making decisions using recommendations from machines. And level 4 is machines making decisions and then telling the humans afterwards what they've done. The thing is, we're already at level 4. We all already have technology like ERA that's able to do that, able to run the supply chain autonomously and able to communicate with you and tell you what it's doing and what you need to look at, all by voice. They're able to develop things like cognitive operating systems. So if you imagine where this blue line is your demand signal, anything that's within expected demands or supply tolerances, anything within our sort of normal forecast deviations, we can simply automate that. I don't need to touch it, let it be automated. The system will then recommend actions for us to do when we get into the realms of abnormal demand or supply. So when we're in the realm of outside our normal forecast tolerance, but within an acceptable level that we can actually handle it, it will then recommend actions based on past decisions that you've made. And then when you get your black swan exceptional events, it will allow you to simulate the different options that you have available to you. But there's a problem. And the problem is the number of data inputs, and specifically when 5G happens, is increasing exponentially. The amount of machine brain power is improving exponentially. But human cognitive capability, unfortunately for us, is remaining relatively static. So the machines are now able to track whether its recommendations were followed and whether human intervention improved or worsened the outcome. And over time, what we're going to establish is that our biases, our limited cognitive power, and our attachments to past knowledge are actually bottlenecks and the cause of bad decisions. So while at the moment, we kind of insist on glass box solutions, we allow machines to come up with recommendations, but we want to see the workings out. We want to understand how you came up with that number. What assumptions did you use? Because we don't really trust you. Over time, as the calculations become more complex, as the data points become more numerous, as the demand for real-time information and same-day delivery reaches its apex, we're basically going to step out of the way and let the machines make the decisions for us. So we end up with a supply chain where we've got robots doing the making and the moving, tools that I haven't discussed like blockchain, recording the transactions and the transfer of ownership, robot process automation, completing all the back office transactions, doing all the ERP updates, those sorts of things, chatbots and digital assistants responding to any queries, talking to customers who might have some concerns about where their order is or when they're going to receive a credit for their return. An AI control tower sitting on top of all of that, analyzing constantly all of the data in real time, identifying issues and recommending solutions. Now, nearly all of that is available right now. And if you think that's a disruptive level of supply chain progression, the thing is we haven't seen anything yet. So once you cross the chasm, we get an exponential level of growth. And you can see here the sort of projections for robots and artificial intelligence. If you look and think we're only at the bottom there at 2020, there's a huge amount of growth to come in this. This is going to affect every area of the supply chain in pretty much every industry, in every geography. I haven't even talked about quantum computing because we're now approaching the quantum era. Google last year claimed quantum supremacy, which is effectively the ability of quantum computing to solve a problem that it would be almost impossible for traditional computers, traditional supercomputers to do. Their quantum computer called Sycamore took 200 seconds to solve a problem that it said a supercomputer would have taken 10,000 years to complete. Now, why do we need quantum computers? Well, we need quantum computers because if we're going to have all of these autonomous last mile delivery robots and drones and all of these different autonomous vehicles moving around constantly, the ability to control that autonomous fleet and to interact with traffic lights and stop signals and everything else it has to do, it needs this level of processing power. Now, luckily, quantum computing is advancing much faster than traditional computing. So traditional computing was driven by Moore's law, the rule that every 2 years, 18 months to 2 years, the transitional power of chips doubled, but their cost halved. So what you ended up with Moore's law, seeing this exponential level of computing power. So we now have more power in the devices that you have in your pocket than, not just more power, but hundreds of times more power in your phone than what got us to the moon, for example. Nevin's law, named after Harmut Nevin, who is the director of engineering at Google, is going at a double exponential rate. So this is the rate of progress of quantum computing, which leaves Moore's law in its dust. And that leads me on to whammy number 3, which is the technological alignment, these machine brains driving those machine hands, creating a fully autonomous end-to-end supply chain where all of these devices are constantly communicating, constantly talking to each other, And we as mere humans haven't got the capability to process all that information. So we're going to look at quantum-based cognitive computing and machine learning systems in order to basically capture this data, identify the trends, identify the exceptions, make recommendations, and manage all of the supply chain. So things like 5G, the adoption rate is going to be exponential because things like working from home, telepresence is going to need all of this. Retailers are already putting beacons outside of their stores, so they're able to identify when one of their customers is approaching their store because of the GPS signal, and they're able to send personalized price alerts and discounts to try and get you to come into that store. So there's going to be a massive take-up on 5G. Because what people want to do, and what the industrial Internet of Things is all about, is connecting these devices. Devices from the industrial world, be that wind turbines or trucks or 3D printers or robots or factories or Medicare devices, to the consumer Internet of Things, which is the world of smart watches and smart devices like Amazon Echoes and thermostats and washing machines. So we're capturing all of this data from the consumer devices all the way through to the industrial devices that are manufacturing them, creating a self-driving, self-adapting supply chain. One of the things that these enable us to do is all of these devices enable to create a digital representation of the physical world. So a lot of companies are spending a lot of money developing these digital twins, which basically are able to mirror what's happening in the real world in a digital environment, so that we can simulate impacts, we can look at constraints, we can see whether or not we've got throughput issues on water pipes or energy consumption or engine performance. All these different things are being captured. This data is allowing us to peel back the layers of the macro to look down right at each individual piece of machinery or pipe to see exactly what's going on. Because what we've moved to is we're having an entire paradigm shift where we're moving from the fifth wave supply chain, where the measure of success is it's invisible. The best supply chain in the world is the one you don't hear about because it's not going wrong, to a world where actually the best supply chain in the world is one that's completely visible and transparent. We see everything that's going on. So we're moving from a world where the CEO was only interested in the supply chain if we had problems, to one where they want to know constantly how are we performing, what's happening, what's the capabilities of our suppliers. We want full transparency. Because these risks, these pandemics and these black swans are just too painful and too expensive. Now, what do I mean by visibility? I mean the visibility of flows, the flows of product, the flows of information, and the flow of money. And once I have visibility of these flows, that gives me visibility of the costs and the risks within my supply chain, the amount of water or energy I consume, the amount of waste we generate, and then where our weak spots and our constraints are in our supply chain, and where the risks are. That gives me a visibility of my impact, the ethical impact, the ecological impact, and the economic impact, which is very important in places like Africa, where we need to make sure that money's going to the right people and it's not, we're not funding corruption, for example. So we want full visibility at the moment. And one of the things that the pandemic has moved attention away from right now is, of course, the climate crisis, but that hasn't gone away, and it's going to come back. And focus is going to come back to, being able to make sure that we have a highly ethical, but also an ecologically sound supply chain. So what we're seeing is a realization of something that I've been talking about since 2012, which is the PAL supply chain. The six-way supply chain is going to be heavily personalized. We're going to constantly try and seek to gain the attention of consumers and customers by creating products that are increasingly personalized, services that are increasingly personalized, and experiences that are increasingly personalized. To be able to deliver that, we're going to have a supply chain that is effectively automated end-to-end, with automated manufacturing, delivery, and planning. And it's going to become increasingly localized. Local production, local storage, and local retail facilities. And one of the big discussions that's coming out of the coronavirus pandemic is, the reshoring and the localization of company supply chain. Governments have been exposed by their inability to get hold of PPE equipment, for example. So they're looking at this and going, we have offshored most of our essential capabilities, and it has hurt us, and it's hurt us bad. We need to bring them back. We need to bring them back so we have the capability as a nation to produce what we need when we need it. Now, the benefit of this is that it lends itself very nicely to the more circular supply chain model, and a supply chain that is more sustainable, able to operate at speed, but also strong. Because the shorter the supply chain, the more resilient, the more responsive, the more agile, and the more sustainable it is. It's going to bring down labor costs, production costs, waste and inventory will come down, transportation costs and times will come down, storage costs will come down, and energy and water consumption will be reduced, because despite using digital twins to be able to monitor it, you're only going to start to make what we need when we need it, rather than making huge amounts and then basically scrapping or selling at discounts. So the longer, the more inflexible, slower, and more prone to unforeseen risks the supply chain is, the shorter it is, the more resilient, responsive, and agile it will become, but also the most sustainable. So, wow, a lot of change coming. What it's doing is it's redefining the very nature of value. We're moving to a whole load of digital business models. Things are becoming servitized. So the ability of each organization to make its own robots or to create its own technology is incredibly limited. So these things are becoming services. And this is good because it's enabling companies to compete on value, not on technology. So we move from software as a service to logistics as a service, or space as a service, transportation as a service, manufacturing as a service. Robotics is now available as a service. Artificial intelligence is available as a service. Even quantum computing is available as a service. And you won't be surprised to hear that the company that's offering that is Amazon. So now we take a look at things like robotics as a service and factory as a service. Sobot, the robot I talked about earlier that's able to make as many t-shirts in an hour as 17 workers out in Bangladesh, the return on investment from that starts on day one. It has a per shift cost of just $55. Nokia's been working on its factory as a service. So these are shipping containers that have 5G enabled capabilities with its own robots, 3D printers, blockchain linked, complete automated, modular, connected manufacturing that could be moved to wherever the demand is. So rather than having to break ground and build huge factories, you now have these mobile modular factories that can go wherever, which can be great for startups because they don't have to make massive investments. They can just rent the factory. So we're moving from a world where companies compete to when Martin Christopher at the start of the 2000s said, actually, we're now in the world of supply chain competing, to actually business models compete. And the supply chain is actually part of that. You see the network bit there. That's our supply chain, our ability to execute, our ability, the value proposition, and deliver it to that customer segment when they want it, in the method that they want it. The difference between innovating within your business model or innovating outside or innovating the entire business model, the best example of that, I think, is Blockbuster versus Netflix. Blockbuster always gets annihilated for saying, well, you had the chance to buy Netflix for $50 million, you didn't take it. It's because they couldn't see beyond their existing business model of stores, retail stores where people went to actually buy and rent videos. And they were very innovative within that business model. They were brought in snacks and goods and drinks and popcorn. They moved into games. They moved into selling and renting films. They did huge amounts of innovation, but only within the paradigm of their existing business model. Netflix just reinvented the business model. So actually what people want is not to go to stores. They want to be entertained. The whole going to the store, rent the video, and more importantly, the taking it back bit is pure inconvenience to the consumer. If we cut that out and just deliver media directly to the consumer when they want it, we're going to win. And of course, now Blockbuster no longer exists, but Netflix is making hay. The thing is, these new business models require a number of things that are actually more complicated to achieve, and that's new mindsets. You see, we're at the start of this S-curve. The disruption has only just begun. And we're going to find that most companies are not structured for the future, they're structured for the past. Labor costs are going to become a less and less relevant part of the equation. Certainly that's going to affect the emerging nations. Assets that companies have spent billions or millions on, are likely to become obsolete. Technology is going to continually undermine the advantage of scale, specifically when most of that technology is available as a service. So traditional organized companies need to effectively develop the DNA of a digital organization, or they will be replaced. They will need to develop complex, adaptive, and anticipatory systems, and they'll need to use technology that enables them to do that. But the trouble is, whilst change is exponential in the upswing, most leaders were educated and trained in the downswing, when change was linear, when you could predict what next year was going to be like because you only simply had to take this year and add a certain percentage to it. We can't do that at the moment. We can't predict what next year is going to be like. We can't even predict what's going to happen next month. So leaders were trained in the downswing. They simply can't handle this, and they're really struggling. So we have exponential technology, but linear leadership. And that linear leadership is consistently focused on the short term. So when I ask companies why they're struggling to innovate, the barriers to change they come up with is, we're constantly forced to show immediate return on investment. We've got this analyst or quarterly stock price focus. We have a complete lack of long-term vision. There's a whole host of silo behaviors, agendas, and metrics within the organization. There's an overwhelming fear of taking risk. And basically the company has learned how to play not to lose, rather than how to play to win. So Alvin Toffler, sci-fi writer who very sadly passed away a couple of years, his quote has become more relevant than ever. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write as they were in the previous waves, but those who cannot learn, unlearn what they've learned, and relearn it. And the problem we have too many people that hold on to their existing knowledge because it gives it gravitas and it stabilizes them. And they have to realize that a lot of that knowledge is no longer relevant. It is the old way of doing things. We have to remember that technology is not telology. It's a how. That's all it is. It's not a why. Digital projects do not make digital companies. Most transformation projects to date have failed. But 84% was the figure given that have a chance of failure. Why are they failing? Why is so much of this digital transformation failing? It's because they don't have a why to attach the how to. So any company that doesn't have a customer-centric strategy or any understanding of how these tools are likely to enable that strategy is basically just going to waste a lot of money. Because what companies actually need is a Copernican business revolution. We used to believe that the Earth was at the center of the universe and the sun and all the planets circled us. This heliocentric model was our belief structure for most of human history. We now realize that's not the case. We now realize that the sun is at the center of the universe and the Earth and all the planets circle it. We need to have the same Copernican business revolution where we realize that instead of the firm being at the center of the business model, the customer is. And we circle them. And these customers have options. And these customers are embracing these new technologies. So we need to move to a more agile and customer-centric model. The way we do this is stop thinking on our products, because our products might be based around an old paradigm that's no longer relevant, and actually start to think about what is the problems that we're solving for our customers and for their customers' customers. If we can use these technologies or develop a business model to solve problems rather than simply sell products, then we're going to get a significant amount of interest from those customers. Because in a customer-centric world, we need customer-centric, data-driven, human plus machine business models. To give you an idea of what that thinking looks like and the difference between this 6-wave leadership and the 5th-wave leadership that I discussed earlier, I'm going to use Kegan Fisher here, who's someone who I interviewed a few years ago. And when I spoke to her, I realized that she talked in a way that was very different to most of the 5th-wave leaders that I spoke to. So when I asked her about her business, which was called Souls, which was using 3D printers and digital modeling to develop orthotics specifically designed for the individual. So you effectively took a photo of your foot and they created soles and orthotics specifically for you. She said this, she said, I'm asking ourselves questions all the time. How do you treat physical product like software? How can we innovate in real time? How can we create real-time closed-loop feedback cycles where we take data from the customer, plug it into an algorithm, and use that to generate a product? sell the product to the customer, find out and understand how they interact with it, pull data from that process back into the algorithm, and then use that to continually improve the physical product. And as she spoke, I realized that I've never heard anyone talk like that before. This was a new mindset, a new way of thinking, a more data-driven, customer-centric, and machine and human mindset. So companies need to not look at these technologies just not as a way to automate existing jobs. That's very much a firm-centric fifth wave mindset. Instead, what they need to do is think about their business models. Think about what is our unique value proposition that we can offer to customers, a segmented range of customers, and what are our execution capabilities in order to deliver that value proposition? What channels can we communicate and go through? What's our supply chain network in order to deliver them? And what processes do we need to execute? So we can use these technologies to work out whether or not we can create more compelling value propositions or product innovations. Can we use them to understand the customer's needs better or create service innovations? Can we use them to improve the effectiveness of delivery through creating network innovations? And can we use them perhaps to improve the efficiency and accuracy of execution via process innovations? So the job really is for business leaders and supply chain leaders to not just think about the physical process of shipping goods, but to think about, can we define, rethink, refine, and align our business models using these new technologies? So some big questions for you. From a product innovation perspective, can we use these technologies to create radical new solutions, to solve new problems? Can we digitize our value proposition? Is there a way we can servitize it? Maybe we can premiumize it. Maybe we can create more personal solutions or more sustainable solutions as sustainability becomes more important to the consumer and the customer. Maybe we can create service innovations, reach new customer segments, use these technologies to be more reliable or more responsive, or to create a 24/7 level of service like the autonomous stores we talked about. Maybe we can create more compelling or personal experiences or more personal communications. Maybe we can use them to help create better engagement with our companies or our products. From a process innovation perspective, can we use it to simply reduce the number of human errors in the supply chain? Can we create more streamlined and aligned processes and break through these silos? Can we use it to create better insights and data analysis, more visibility and transparency? Can we use it to redirect human effort away from rules-based repetitive tasks that add little value into tasks that add great value to the customer and to the business? Or could we even just use them to create a safer way of working and remove the risks? And then from a supply chain perspective, can we use them to create network innovations, to create a more local, agile, or flexible supply chain? Can we use these technologies to create a more reliable or responsive supply chain, a more transparent supply chain, a more sustainable supply chain? And can we use them to create now in this post-COVID world, contact-free delivery mechanisms? You see, and I'm going to use a quote from my own book. I don't know how arrogant it is. I'm assuming it's quite arrogant, but I'm going to do it anyway. You need to disrupt yourself before someone else does. So as I write in my book, this transition point, if you had to rebuild your company today, knowing how people use technology, how they behave in this post-pandemic world, what they value, and what is technically possible, would it resemble the company you currently work in? Because if it doesn't resemble it, then the challenge for you is to change before a new competitor arrives who could look just like that and use these new technologies in all the ways I discussed earlier and take away your business. Because this new wave can be opportunity or threat. It can be creation or destruction. Whichever you choose is entirely up to you, but I guarantee you, doing nothing is not an option. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. So I think that people have got lots of questions. Well, they've definitely got a lot to think about. There is one question that was specifically asked on the group, and that is, how will the sixth wave affect the increase in the gap we currently find between first world and third world countries?
That's a really good question, actually. I talk about this quite a bit in my book. I think that sixth wave has benefits and it has dangers. And I think the benefits are, the digitized nature of technology means that, for example, this very webinar is being used using technology that effectively we probably wouldn't have used 5 years ago. So it's enabled us to connect in ways and to, you know, have use third world or developing world emerging nation workforces in a way that wasn't possible. That's now going to get access to technology that previously would have took decades to diffuse. The danger part is that ultimately one of the, you know, the benefits for a lot of emerging nations is that they have a large number of people who are able to operate and work for a lower cost price point than the Western workers. And what this technology brings is the capability for Western economies, and it's becoming increasingly more prevalent with things like the trade war that's about to kick off between the US and China, to reshore a lot of that manufacturing and actually take away the opportunity for a lot of these countries to have the industrial revolution that they perhaps were expecting, where lots of people, you know, come to the cities and do manual, repetitive jobs that are ultimately very boring, not very value adding for them, but provide a wage that enables you to move into the middle classes. So I think there's that risk. There's also the issue that things like robots, road robots and drones, you know, have to have an infrastructure that enables them to work. So it'd be that 5G network, or, you know, if you look at the little road robots that go along the pavements in the UK and the US, you know, if you go to a place in Africa, for example, they don't have those nice, clean, you know, well laid out pavements. So some of those technologies potentially aren't able to be used in the same way. But some of them, like drones, for example, might allow them to circumvent some of these technological gaps and move straight to drone deliveries, specifically for things like you know, delivering, you know, medication and treatments into areas that were potentially either very dangerous to get to or very difficult to get to. So I think there are some major pros that this wave would bring, but there's also some significant cons.
I think as there are with everything. So
technology is a double-edged sword.
No, it definitely is. There are a lot of comments. I think that we will need to do a follow-up webinar at some point. In the meantime, if you have not got a copy of Sean's book, I strongly recommend that you try and get one and read it. As much as it's scary, it really unpacks this in a lot more detail, a lot more insight, and a lot more prediction in terms of what we can expect in the future, in terms of how it will affect us as humans, our culture, our economies, and how we live. And he has done the mind-numbing task of converting it into an audio book that will be available in the next couple of weeks. So we will keep you guys posted on our website and let you know once it's available. If you've got any questions for Sean directly, we will put his email address up on our website by the webinar. And yes, I think any other questions, you could send them to Sean directly. I see somebody who says they've read the book, all 600 pages, but it's worth it. So we have to unfortunately wrap up. I know there's lots of questions and there's lots of discussion that we could carry on with for hours, but we are out of time. So thank you all for joining us. Sean, thank you so much for giving your time.
No problem. I for some reason, Prezi was fighting with Zoom for the entire duration, so I do apologise for all the technical issues I had throughout that. I'm going to keep click on the screen to get it to move slides, but I hope it didn't ruin the experience too much.
No, not at all. I think it was fine. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for your support of SAPIX and for your contribution to the supply chain community. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Well, and I didn't mention while everybody's leaving about the upcoming workshops that we have and the masterclass that Sean will be offering. So we'll publish that on the website and we'll share that information for everybody that was in the session, for those of you that are still on here.
Hi, Sean.
Hi, Lars.
Long time no talk.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
That was a good presentation. We are right in the middle of it.
For some reason, the presentation tool and the Zoom seem to compete with each other continually throughout it. So it was driving me
Content
insane.
outweighed the technical glitch, Sean.
Oh, you know what? Every time I clicked it, sometimes it wouldn't go. Then I have to click the screen, which caused it to zoom a little bit.
No, it really, don't stress. You did a great job.
And then, of course, I set a timer and the alarm went off.
Still people here. Oh, there's Cindy. Oh, there's my new friend Fam.
She's here.
Hi, Cindy.
Hi, how are you?
Okay.
Very
Yeah,
good.
she's still here.
Good. Well done, Sean, once again.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope that was okay. I hope it came across okay.
It was brilliant.
And you should come visit us with see the 5G, what you can do. There are some amazing stuff.
Say that again, Lars. I didn't quite catch that.
You should come and visit us in Stockholm to see the 5G demos that we have.
I can imagine they're pretty impressive.
Well, it's mind blowing, some of it, but it's that's the hard part. Actually, as you say, so get beyond what you know and to go into what you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's an uncomfortable place to be for most people when they've traded off what they know. You know, we are devaluing to some extent, you know, human experience, because that used to be what we traded off. You know, I'm 50 years old, which means I've got 30 years of work experience, which means I'm better than someone who's just entered into the marketplace 2 years ago. That's kind of, in a lot of cases, been turned on its head, which because the people who are coming out 2 years ago might have learned machine learning or data analysis, some skills that, you know, we haven't been exposed to. So it's yeah, and that causes a lot of whole emotional conflicts, and people with mortgages and kids at university and all this sort of stuff can't suddenly decide not to work anymore to learn all these skills.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So thank you for today, and take care, guys.
Thanks everyone. Cheers, Matt. Lars, lovely to speak to you.